Welcome to Unleash the Awesome with Dave Gambrill. All of us have unique skills, talents, and abilities that aren't being used to their full potential. Our mission is to share the people, tools, apps, and other resources that will help you unleash your awesome on the world.
Yo, what's up? It's Dave. Welcome to another episode of Unleash the Awesome. Today, let's talk about how it's really hard to make good decisions with bad information. Let's face it, man, we are being inundated with so much information these days, and with the advent of all these artificial intelligence, generative bots and stuff that's creating even more information, it is getting harder and harder to figure out the signal from the noise. So what do you do about it? How do you handle it? So I want to share some examples or some ideas or some concepts or some things or some frameworks that I use to help me figure out what information is the best information so I can make a better decision. Because honestly, if you're trying to make a decision for your business or your family or your financial future or whatever, if you have bad information and you continue to make decisions based on bad information, you're going to continue to have bad outcomes. Conversely, if your information is a little better, if you have good information, then you have a much better chance of making good decisions based on that information to get the outcomes that you're looking for over time. So let's talk about some of the information we see and just how to think about it. I think one of the best examples, because I see it pretty much every morning in the gym. And let me be clear, I do not watch the news. I am somebody who believes that if you're watching the news, especially if you're only watching one channel, you're probably misinformed. And if you're making decisions based on that, you're probably not making good decisions because it's probably not great information. Let me explain to you why. When I'm in the gym in the morning and I'm on the treadmill, usually I'm in there pretty early. And by the time I'm doing cardio, it's like the 5 o'clock hour. It's just turning to 5 o'clock. And in the gym, I'm listening to a podcast or audiobook or something on my headphones. But in the gym up at the front, there's 10 TVs. And there's a whole bunch of different channels. ESPN takes up 3 of them maybe. But then there are news channels, and there's a left-leaning politically channel, and there's a right-leaning politically channel, and there's a financial channel, and there's some local news channels, and there might be another kind of middle-of-the-road news channel, right? So there's 5 or 6 news channels. And when the 5 o'clock hour comes along, they're all reporting on the big news story of the day, whatever that happens to be. And even without having to hear it, understand exactly what they're saying, you can just watch from the graphics on the bottom third of the screen, the Cryon, I think it's called. You can just see how they're reporting the same exact story. And if there's 5 or 6 channels, you're getting 5 or 6 different, sometimes very distinct viewpoints on the same exact story. So think about that. If you're only watching one of those channels and you're watching it to one of the ones that's kind of on the extreme side of things, then the information that you're getting is so skewed that it's probably not good. It's probably not great information. So what I do is I look across those news channels and I go, okay, and I kind of treat it like an event in the Olympics where they have judging, right? Like figure skating or synchronized swimming or something like that. And I tend to throw out the high and the low scores and realize that the answer is probably somewhere in the middle, right? The real information, the information that I probably need to act on if I wanted to act on is probably closer to the middle, right? I'm not saying they're all reporting just lies, although in some cases we found that to be true. And actually in one of the cases, there's one news channel, they went to court to defend a court case, and their own lawyer said no reasonable person should believe that what we share on this channel is fact. I was like, what? So if they're saying that about their own channel, right, it should tell you okay, you need to be a little more discerning in the information that you're taking from there. So anyway, I look at that stuff and I go, okay, the answer is probably somewhere closer in the middle, right? This is kind of called triangulation, right? That's a fancy term they use in math to say if you have 2 points of a triangle, you can use that information to find the third point, right? And the third point is not the same as those other 2 points, right? So you can kind of triangulate the information and say, oh, okay, this is probably closer to the information that I need. This is probably closer to the real truth, and we're not going to argue truth today, but you know what I mean, right? Because all of these channels have their own biases and the way they're approaching things. And so there's probably something closer in the middle. So that's just one way as I'm going through my day, as I'm taking in information, I kind of look at stuff and go, okay, right? And I discount one way or the other based on how this channel tends to share things. And then I go, okay, real information is probably closer to the middle. Another example, I just got done listening to this amazing book that just came out actually last week. It's called Outlive, The Art and Science of Longevity by Dr. Peter Attia. Highly scientific, really geeky, but if you're into science and healthcare and lifespan and health span and longevity, you should probably go listen to it. I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes for you. But what Dr. Peter Attia talks about, by the way, he has a podcast called The Drive. It's really good too if you want kind of like a sneak peek of some of the stuff he talks about in his book. And so I was listening to his book, and one of the arguments he makes in there is about medicine and healthcare, especially in the United States. And he was talking about how we used to have medicine 1.0, which was like hundreds of years ago. And then we had medicine 2.0, which is pretty much what we're under now and has been working for the last, a couple hundred years, and how most of it is not focused on prevention. It's on treating acute stuff, and how he's making the proposal that we need to move to medicine 3.0, which is more preventative and much more progressive and taking action much earlier as it relates to things, especially like cancer, cardiovascular disease, stuff like that. And in science and in healthcare, right, one of the gold standards, or the gold standard for information, is something known as a randomized controlled trial. Okay, and it's based on the scientific method, and it's usually replicated, meaning that's done by multiple test sites. So the test was done, the data came out, and then other people can replicate it and get similar data. That tells us that we probably have really good information, really good data to act on, okay? However, there's just some things that, due to profit motive or the size of the population you would need to see a statistical significance in the study, or the duration of the study that you need to do, or whatever, there are some studies that will just not ever get done. Right? Unless they're crowdsourced, and that's starting to happen for things like psilocybin and some other psychedelics. Johns Hopkins is doing a lot of that research. So one of the things you have to do is kind of say, okay, let's look at the good randomized control trials. Let's look at other anecdata, as Dr. Andrew Huberman calls it, meaning anecdotal evidence in some other places. Let's use some math tools that I'm not going to try to explain to you today, but called Mendelian randomization. So you could take all of these things and you could say, all right, if all of the data tends to be pointing in this direction from all of these different sources, some of them much better than others, but if they all tend to be pointing in the right direction or the same direction, then we can probably make a decision or take some action based on that information, even though we know that it doesn't necessarily show causation, right? It's just correlation at this point. But if the thing that you're trying to do is not going to cause any harm, or it's not expensive and you want to try it, then it's probably worth trying based on all the data trending in that one direction, right? So this is an example where you're taking as Judge Wapner used to call it on the People's Court when I was a little kid, a preponderance of the evidence is pointing toward the direction like that this is probably true and good information that we can make some decisions based on, right? What I didn't say there, and what he didn't say in that book, is you just take one person's perspective or one doctor's perspective of a handful of patients that they're treating and then take action on that, which we've seen recently in some of these worldwide infectious disease situations that we had where like one person said, yeah, this thing is working really well for me and my patients. But when you do a little research, you find out they only had 3 patients and there's all these other confounding factors. And that person really wasn't even practicing medicine full time. They were doing political advocacy and all these other things. So like that data point is not really good. And if you're making decisions based on that bad information, then you're probably most definitely making a bad decision. But if you zoom out 10,000, 30,000 of you and you look at all the information, then you go, okay, this seems to be pointing in that direction, right? So that's just another way to think about, okay, we're getting all this information. How do I decide? And obviously in the scientific realm, you have to make yourself at least, you have to understand at least the basics of how science works and how to look at that stuff, because the way it's reported in the news, going back to my original example, is terrible. They translate it so poorly. There's so much lost in translation of a good study, right? Or they'll cherry pick something that's just totally crazy and make that the headline and then run with it. And then people use that as their belief. They're making a decision based on a headline they saw in the news of a scientific article that they never even read, and they don't even know if that scientific article is good. what the data actually says, things like that, right? They just didn't dig deeper. So it's another example of how you could make really bad choices and really bad decisions based on what is probably good information, but the source that you're getting it from is not great, just meaning the news in general. They suck at reporting science, right? So you probably want to go closer to the source and read the paper if you can understand it. And I'm not trying to say that you can't understand it, but there's probably some information and things in there that you need to educate yourself about. I wouldn't be able to read them either if I didn't spend 12 years of my life in the pharmaceuticals sales arena and reading clinical trials and presenting them to doctors every single day, 20 and 30 and 50 times a day, right? So I'm pretty conversant in that stuff. I could see it, I could look at it, I can make a decision based on what I see there. So those are just like two examples of how you kind of have to parse the data a little bit to find out really what the good information is that you can make your good decisions on. Some other practical advice that I'll give you, or some things to consider, I guess. Something else you need to be aware of are logical fallacies. And there's actually a website called, let me make sure I get it right. I'll put it in the show notes for you as well. Your logical fallacy is. All right. So a lot of information is presented, especially on blogs and opinion pieces and social media, whatever. People present their information, and many times it is laden with multiple logical fallacies, right, that have nothing to do with the actual data or the actual argument, right? They're doing other things to try to get you away from the real information that you probably need, right? Okay, and there's reasons why they're probably trying to get you away from that. So I would familiarize yourself with logical fallacies if you've not visited those in a while or you've never seen them before. Go look at that and kind of understand what they are, because then when you know them and then people present information to you using them, then you can go, oh, okay, I sense a logical fallacy here. Let me, like I said before, kind of discount this information a little bit based on how they're presenting it. Not saying it's totally false, but the way they're bringing it, I probably need to dig a little deeper and see this information for myself. All right. And then the other one that has helped me tremendously is a book called Super Thinking, the Big Book of Mental Models. Okay, Super Thinking, the Big Book of Mental Models. And what this does is it's kind of like the opposite of the logical fallacy thing. It gives you ways through mental models to think about how you see information and how you perceive the world. So if you are equipped with ways to quickly handle information, and now you know, okay, I need to look at the source, I need to probably have multiple sources, I need to understand what logical fallacies are, and then if you have some mental models to handle that information, you can handle it so much faster. So people often will say to me, like, how do you stay on top of all this stuff? Like especially with the rise of these artificial intelligence things that we've had over the last 6 months to a year, they're like, how do you stay on top of this? I'm like, well, I used to work for a software company. I'm in the tech arena anyway. I have this thing called digital marketing mentorship in Facebook where I've been helping people do this stuff forever. So I'm kind of in it anyway, but I understand these logical fallacies. I understand these mental models, and I have a handful that I've borrowed from that book that I use all the time. So as information comes at me, I can make a much faster decision because I'm not having to start from scratch, right? And this is a muscle that I have exercised, if you will, a lot, right? So I look at the information, I go, okay, what are they trying to tell me? What are the biases? What are the logical fallacies? What else do I need to know here? What information is missing? What questions should I be asking that I'm not asking? What should they be telling me that they're not telling me, right? Those are things I'm kind of approaching the information with, and I go, okay. And then I can get a little closer to the information that I need to make a good decision. So again, your logical fallacy, just logical fallacies in general, again, the links will be in the show notes, yourlogicalfallacyis.com, and then Super Thinking, the Big Book of Mental Models. And the last example I'll give you to close it out is this, right? Because you've probably done this yourself. This is probably the best real world example of you and me getting the best information you can, right? And it's funny because it's almost irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. Like, we tend to not use this level of detail or digging into the information on the things that matter, on the big things that matter, right? We tend to do it with something like this. So if you ever wanted to buy like a 10-inch nonstick skillet for your kitchen, all right, you want to make better omelets or something, pancakes, whatever. Many of us, myself included, will go to Amazon and we'll look for 10-inch skillets, and we'll look at the description, and we'll look at the reviews, and we'll look at the good reviews, and we'll look at the bad reviews, and maybe we'll look at a video on YouTube about that product, and maybe we'll go to Walmart.com and see if they have it at a better price or different price, and we'll see how people review it in there, and maybe we'll go look at some food blogs and whatever. on like a $30 purchase that in the grand scheme of things, I know it can definitely add a lot of benefit to your life, and I get all that. But like in the grand scheme of things, a $30 purchase, it really doesn't matter. But we'll do a level of diligence on a purchase like that we should be doing. We should be doing on the bigger information that we're using to make decisions about our family, or how we're going to vote, or where in the world we want to live, or how we want to raise our kids, or what investments we want to make, like all those things. If we would take the same diligence that we do as it relates to buying a pan on Amazon to all those other things, it would be a lot easier for us to make better decisions, because the information that we get tends to be better, because we'll pick through all of that stuff and go, okay, where is the real information that I need to make a decision? Yeah. So to review, 1, look at your sources, understand that some have biases, and so you probably want to have multiple sources. 2, you should probably use different kinds of data, like Dr. Peter Attia talked about in his book. So randomized controlled trials. You can look at epidemiological information. You could look at retrospective analysis, things like that. You can look at some anecdata. Okay. Anecdata. You can look at some personal experience that people have. That'll probably help you make a good decision. You should probably also understand what logical fallacies are, and then have some mental models that you can use to approach this information. Because when you do those things in combination and you practice it and you exercise this muscle and you get good at it, and it gets beyond you consciously having to do it, and then just doing this on a subconscious level, which will take a little time, honestly, but if you practice it a little bit, it will become subconscious to you. I know without a shadow of a doubt, when you do that, it will help you unleash your awesome on the world. See ya.
Thanks for listening to Unleash the Awesome. Please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please share us on your favorite social media platforms using #UnleashAwesome.